The laughter started before I even sat down. I heard it the moment the door slid open, not loud, not cruel exactly, just the kind of laughter that happens when a room full of people see something they find absurd and they do not think anyone is watching. 40 alien students, all of them settled into their seats in the great curved lecture hall of the Interstellar Academic Cooperative, all of them staring at the hollow display floating at the front of the room. The hollow display showed Earth, and on Earth, in crisp magnified detail, was a dandelion. I stood in the doorway for a moment, my bag over one shoulder, my stylus in my hand. The door had already closed behind me. There was no going back through it. And even if there was, I would not have gone. My mother did not raise a woman who walks backward out of rooms. I found a seat near the middle. Nobody moved to make space. Nobody moved to block me either. I was simply an object they were not sure how to categorize, yet like a piece of furniture that had appeared overnight and might belong there or might not. I set my bag down. I clicked my stylus once. I looked at the dandelion on the screen. I had grown up pulling dandelions from the yard outside my grandmother's house. In Accra, she called them weeds. She was right, they were weeds. They were also, as I would come to explain later, nearly indestructible, medically useful, capable of growing through cracked stone and entirely edible from root to flower. But none of that was on the screen, just the yellow head of it, just the soft, ridiculous bloom. The instructor entered from the side. He was Velhari, 4 respiratory sacs along his collar, deep violet skin, movements like water finding its level. He moved to the front of the room with the particular confidence of someone who had held this position for longer than most of his students had been alive. He did not introduce himself. His name was already listed in the course registry. Instructor Vel Soren. He simply turned to the hollow display, gestured once, and began. Xenobiology 101, he said. His translator delivered the words in clean, flat standard, the study of biological systems across registered worlds. This semester, we will examine 11 planets. We will begin with the ones that require the least background knowledge to understand and work toward complexity. He clicked forward. The dandelion disappeared. A slide appeared with 11 planet names, listed in order of what the course registry called academic accessibility. Earth was 10th. Not last 10th. There was a second category under each planet name, a classification, most read. Things like temperate biosphere or high-density ecosystem or apex predator. Rich, these were real classifications. Meaningful ones, categories that came with weight. Earth's classification read, anomalous. Biosphere non-standard. Same category as a dead moon 3. Systems over that occasionally vented methane in patterns that loosely resembled biological respiration, not alive, not dangerous, just strange. A footnote, an asterisk on the map of the universe that someone had circled in red marker and labeled question mark. I clicked my stylus once. The student to my left was Velhari like the instructor, though younger. The student in front of me had 6 arms, folded neatly across a desk built for 6 arms, which told me the furniture here had been designed without me in mind. His name, I would learn, was Rokas. He was from a world I could not pronounce correctly on the first 3 attempts. He had the kind of ease about him that comes from being very funny for a very long time, the ease of someone who has learned that making others laugh is its own form of power. He did not wait long. The instructor had barely moved to the second planet when Rokas tilted his upper left arm toward the student beside him and said, just loudly enough to carry, I read that Earth mammals sometimes grow bone on the outside, as a medical condition. The student beside him made a sound like a kettle releasing steam, laughter. I knew what he meant. He meant calluses. The thickening of skin over repeated pressure, the body's own answer to friction. And GT, snorts. And GT. I had them on my palms from years of rock climbing. I had them on my feet from years of walking on ground that did not care about comfort. They were not bone. They were not a disease. They were the skin doing what skin does when the world asks something difficult of it. I clicked my stylus twice. Velsorin continued his lecture without acknowledging the exchange. Either he had not heard or he had heard and found it unremarkable. Both possibilities were equally instructive. I wrote notes. I wrote them in full sentences, the way my father had taught me. He was an engineer. He always said that a note written in fragments is a thought left unfinished. I wrote about the classification system. I wrote about the 11 planets and their ordering. I wrote the words non-standard and underlined them, not out of hurt, but because I wanted to remember exactly how it felt to read them so I could use that feeling later. At the end of the first hour, Velsorin said something that I would think about for the rest of the semester. Earth, he said, gesturing once at its position on the list, presents a particular challenge to xenobiological study. Its systems do not follow predictable models. Its dominant species produces data that conflicts with established survival frameworks. For these reasons, it has resisted meaningful academic categorization. It is a statistical anomaly too chaotic to produce reliable conclusions. He said it the way someone says a fact. Not cruelly, not with any pleasure, just the way you say water is wet or distance is measured in light years, clinical. Final. I stopped clicking my stylus. I looked at the slide. I thought about the 14 bones in the human finger, each one shaped over millions of years of picking things up, making things, refusing to put things down. I thought about my grandmother's hands pulling dandelions from cracked, dry earth. I thought about the first human being who ever looked at a fire and decided not to run. After class, I pulled up my own student file. Standard snorts. Procedure for new enrollees. Name. Planet of origin. Physical parameters. Biological tolerances. It was meant to help the medical station on the third deck calibrate their equipment. I had filled it out on the transport ship and not thought about it since. I read it now. Gravity tolerance up to 3 times. Standard without muscular degradation. Temperature range functional between and plus 50 degrees C. Pathogen resistance broad spectrum. Acquired and adaptive. Bone density significantly above Vilhari baseline. Healing rate above average for carbon-based organisms. Psychological stress threshold high. Mechanism unknown. I read the last line twice. Mechanism unknown. I clicked my stylus once, set it down on the desk, looked out at the station. Through the narrow window beside me, at the black and the stars in the cold. Nothing between them. The file was not describing a student. It read like a weapon specification. I had never thought about it that way before. I picked the stylus back up, clicked it. Once more, put it in my bag. Outside in the corridor, Rokas was telling the callous joke again to a new audience, 3 students, different species, different worlds, all of them making sounds that their respective biologies used for laughter. It was a good performance, I could see that. He knew exactly how long to pause before the ending. He had the timing of someone who had been making people laugh since before he was old enough to know why timing mattered. I walked past him. He noticed his upper right arm stilled. For half a second, I smiled, not the smile I use when something is funny, the other one, the one my mother taught me when I was 11, and starting a new school where nobody looked like me, and some of them thought that was worth remarking on. The smile that says, I see you, I understand exactly what you are doing, and I have already decided it does not touch me. His arm resumed its gesture. He continued the joke. I walked to the end of the corridor. There was a window there, floor to ceiling, looking out at the docking bay. Far below, 3 ships, 2 alien in design, 1 human-built, squat and gray, and practical in the way that human-built things often are. No elegant, just function, just the accumulated decisions of a species that had learned over a very long time that beauty was secondary to survival. I stood at the window for a while. The classification slide was still in my head. Non-standard, anomalous, the 10th planet on an 11-planet list, filed between a methane moon and a world that was still cooling from its last volcanic age. I thought, okay. I thought, sure. I thought, bless your hearts. And then I went to find the library, because the semester had only just begun and I had a great deal of work to do. The vial was smaller than my thumb. I set it on the lab table, and Rokas looked at it the way someone looks at a joke they have not understood yet. His 4 upper eyes tracked it, his lower 2 stayed on me. This was, I had learned over the previous week, his default expression when he was actually paying attention. He performed attention differently, louder, and with more arm movement. Real attention from Rokas was quiet. That is your sample, he said. It was not a question. That is my sample, I said. The lab assignment was straightforward. Each team of 4 would analyze biological samples from their home planets and submit them through the standard threat yield index system. The index would rate each sample on a scale that measured ecological impact, biological complexity, and interstellar threat potential. Instructor Velsorin had explained at the start of class that the exercise was designed to help students understand the relative weight of their home biospheres. Nobody was expected to score high. The point was calibration. Our team of 4 had assembled with the enthusiasm of 4 people who had not chosen each other. Rokas I already knew or knew of. He had taken the seat across from me, which I interpreted as either an olive branch or a continuation of observation. I had not decided which yet. Edival sat to my right. She was Esselvin, her body narrow and precise, her movements deliberate in the way that suggested she had calculated the energy cost of each one and decided only the necessary ones were worth making. She had said exactly 4 words to me across 6 days of shared classes. All 4 of them had been questions, and all 4 had been good ones. The 4th member of our team was Dune, large blue, in the way that deep water is blue. Morkin, which I knew from my pre-arrival. Reading meant a species that communicated primarily through low-frequency vibration, though they had translated interfaces built into their collarbones for standard interaction. He had looked at me the first day with an expression I could not read and had not yet looked away completely, not with hostility, more like I was an equation. He had started working and not yet solved. Edival went first. She placed her sample on the analyzer with the care of someone handling historical evidence. Crystalline bacteria from the deep shelf regions of Esselveth, she said too. No one in particular. Anaerobic, self-replicating under pressure, capable of lattice formation up to 12 m in optimal conditions. The index system processed, the number appeared 7.8. There was a sound around the table, not quite a gasp, something more like a collective recalibration. Rokas went next. He placed his sample, a sealed container of compressed spores, from his home world's dominant fungal network with the particular casualness of someone who expects applause. The row spore complex, he said, largest single biological network on any recorded world, covers 62% of the landmass, responds to environmental input across the entire surface simultaneously. It is, for practical purposes, one organism the size of a continent. The index processed 6.2. Rokas accepted this with the grace of someone who had expected higher and was pretending he had not. Dune placed his sample without commentary, dense organic matter from a deep ocean source. The index processed it at 5.1. Dune did not react. Then it was my turn. I picked up the vial. It was amber-colored, thick, warm to the touch even through the glass because I had been holding it in my palm since the start of class, which was a habit, not a decision. It caught the light in a way that made Rokas tilt his head. "What is it?" he asked. "Honey," I said. A pause. "Honey," he repeated. "A substance produced by a flying insect. On Earth, it collects pollen from flowering plants, processes it internally, and deposits the result in wax structures. The result is honey. Humans have been harvesting it for at least 8,000 years. Rokas looked at the vial, then at me. Then at the vial again. "You brought food," he said, clear as throat. "I brought a sample," I said. "It happens to also be food." I placed it in the analyzer. The system took longer than it had for the others. This was already unusual. Standard samples processed in under 10 seconds. The vial of honey sat in the chamber for nearly 40. Edival noticed. I saw her eyes move to the processing timer and stay there. Dune's collar interface produced a low hum, not words, just a sound. Then the flags appeared. The first one was yellow, ecological role complex, standard flag for organisms with broad environmental interactions. Rokas's spores had gotten 1-2. The second flag was yellow, becoming orange, keystone species dependency. This meant the sample came from an organism whose removal would trigger cascading failures in connected systems. Edival's bacteria had gotten a version of this. The third flag was red, pollination network integration. The insect that produced my sample was, the system had calculated, directly responsible for the reproductive cycle of a significant portion of Earth's flowering plant life. Remove the insect, the plants do not reproduce, the animals that eat the plants do not eat, the chain continues. Until it does not. Then the fourth flag appeared. None of us had seen a gray flag before. I had not known gray flags existed in the system. The index scale went yellow to orange to red. That was the known range. The gray flag read, cascading planetary collapse risk, cross biosphere. Dependency rating, critical. Edival made a sound that her translator did not convert. I think it was the Esselvin equivalent of held breath. Roka stared at the vial of honey still sitting in the analyzer, warm amber, approximately the size of his smallest hand. The animal that makes this, he said. Where is it in the index? The insect, I said. It is called a bee. Where is the bee in the threat index? I looked at him. It is not in the threat index. It is in the endangered species registry. The gray flag kept blinking. The bee is dying, I said. There are several reasons: habitat reduction, pesticide exposure, a parasitic mite that attacks the colony's young, climate shifts that desynchronize the bees, emergent cycle with the blooming cycle of the plants it depends on. I picked the vial up when the analyzer released it. If the bee disappears entirely, current projections estimate that approximately 1/3 of Earth's cultivated food crops would fail within a decade. Rokas looked at the gray flag. One insect, he said. One insect, I agreed. Nobody said anything for a moment. I set the vial down again, and then, because the lab period still had 40 minutes left and I had the floor in a way I rarely have floors, I kept going. I had not planned to, but something about the gray flag, something about the way Edival was still staring at it, made me feel that the room was ready to hear things it had not been ready to hear before. I told them about the botfly, a fly that lays its eggs beneath the skin of mammals. The larvae develop internally, feeding on tissue, and emerge after several weeks, painful, disturbing by any standard, not lethal to a healthy adult human. On Earth this was unremarkable enough that there were online forums where people discussed their experiences with something approaching casual storytelling. Rokas' 6 arms stilled. I told them about the Turritopsis dornia, a jellyfish. Technically, when exposed to stress or injury, it reverts to its juvenile state and begins its life cycle again. It does not age toward death, it ages backward away from it. Biologically, under the right conditions, it does not die. Edival finally looked away from the flag. She looked at me instead. I told them about the tardigrade, less than a millimeter long, capable of entering a state called cryptobiosis, which it loses nearly all water content, suspends all metabolic activity, and survives open space, vacuum, radiation, temperatures close to absolute zero. It had survived all 5 of Earth's mass extinction events. It was alive and unchanged in my planet's oceans right now, alongside everything else. Dune's collar interface hummed again, this time longer. Then I told them about cordyceps, a fungus. It infects insects. It spreads through the body. It alters behavior at the neurological level, compelling the host to climb to a high point to expose itself. Then the fungus blooms through the head, spores released from the elevated position for maximum spread. It controls the brain, Roka said. His voice had lost its performance quality entirely. This was his actual voice. It redirects behavior toward the Fungus's reproductive interests, I said. Does it affect humans? Not the species that affects insects. No, there are related species. We study them carefully. How carefully? I thought about how to say it simply. There are entire scientific fields dedicated to making sure the answer to that question stays no. Dune spoke. He had not spoken since the sample readings. His voice came through the collar interface as a low, flat translation, one word. Tuesday, he said. I looked at him, sorry. He indicated the list of organisms I had described. Is this level of biological intensity normal for Earth? Tuesday, you said this to the group last week, that something ordinary is a Tuesday. Is this your Tuesday? I looked at the gray flag still blinking, honey from a dying insect. Critical cascade risk, the size of my thumb. Yes, I said, more or less. Dune looked at me for a long time, still working the equation, still not finished. Rokas looked at the vial of honey, then at the gray flag, then at his spores, which had scored 6.2 and which he had been proud of 20 minutes ago. He did not say anything. I picked up my vial, put it back in my bag carefully, the way you carry something old and irreplaceable. The lab period continued. Edivel input secondary data with her usual precision. Dune submitted Morkin readings without commentary. Rokas filled out his portion of the report in silence, which was, in my 1 week of knowing him, unprecedented. The gray flag stayed in the system long. It would be there when Velsorin reviewed the team submissions. It would be flagged as anomalous in the course data. I did not know then what he would do with it, but I noticed on my way out of the lab that Rokas did not tell a single joke for the rest of the afternoon. That felt in a quiet way like something. The simulation was called a Class 4 environment. The briefing described it as a mid-range biosphere with moderate oxygen levels, variable terrain, and active predator presence. Velsorin presented it to the cohort with the calm of someone delivering expected news. This exercise is designed to be failed, he said. You will enter, you will encounter conditions your biology is not built for. You will make decisions under pressure. Most of you will not survive past the first hour. This is the point. Failure teaches what success cannot. 40 of us lined up outside the simulation chamber. The chamber itself was large enough to hold a small forest, which it did. I could see the tree line through the observation glass before we entered. Green-gray vegetation, dense and low to the ground, the kind of growth that happens when light is scarce and competition is high. The sky above it was rendered amber, not earth amber, amber with a chemical undertone that the briefing had listed as nitrogen-sulfur composite atmosphere, breathable at low concentrations, irritating at high ones. I pulled on my boots, tied them the way my father showed me, double knot loop. Tugged. Rokas appeared beside me. You are checking your footwear, he said. I always check my footwear before walking into a simulated hostile environment. Before walking anywhere, I said, my father says you should always know what is between you and the ground. Rokas considered this. My father says the same thing, but about the sky. Different planets, I said. Same instinct. He did not make a joke out of it. He just nodded, which from him felt significant. We entered The first 6 minutes were fine. The environment was disorienting in the way that unfamiliar places always are. The light wrong, the air carrying a faint sulfur edge that my throat registered, and then stopped registering after the third breath. The vegetation was dry. Underfoot it crunched. I noted that sound carried in dry environments differently than in wet ones. You could hear things coming. You could also be heard. I moved slowly, not carefully, exactly. Deliberately. There is a difference. Careful implies fear of the wrong step. Deliberate implies intention in each one. Around me through the trees I could hear other students' quick movements, Rokas. 6 feet on dry brush, the heavier tread of dune somewhere to the east, Edevel. I could not hear at all, which meant she was either very good at this or already down. The first predator appeared at 14 minutes. It came from above. I did not see it. I heard the change in air pressure, the particular silence that falls just before something large moves, and I was already dropping to one knee and pressing into the shadow of the nearest trunk before I had consciously decided to. The predator, a large angular creature, rendered in the simulation as something between a raptor and a mantis, passed over me and continued north. It had not seen me. I stayed still for another 30 seconds. Then I moved again. At 22 minutes I found water, a shallow channel running between exposed rocks. I crouched beside it, dipped one finger, smelled it. There was no reliable way to test the water chemistry without equipment I did not have, so I did the next available thing. And GT, snorts. And GT. I rubbed a small amount on the inside of my wrist and waited 90 seconds. No immediate reaction, no burning, no swelling, no color change. This was not a guarantee of safety. It was a data point. I filed it and moved on without drinking. At 31 minutes I found a plant with bitter-smelling leaves. I tore one and held it to my lower lip, not inside the mouth, just contact. Waited nothing. I tore another and rubbed it between my palms. The smell intensified. I tucked 2 leaves into my jacket pocket and kept moving. At 41 minutes the simulation announced its first elimination, a tone soft and final. That meant a participant had reached their threshold. Then another tone, then 3 more in close succession. Roka's tone came at 43 minutes. I heard it and kept walking. At 50 minutes I found a dry overhang of rock well above the ground level with a clear sightline in 3 directions and enough shadow that I could sit without being profiled against the sky. I sat. I took the 2 leaves from my pocket, used one to wipe moisture from the rock surface above me, which was minimal but present. I was building a picture of the environment, not fighting it, not running from it, just reading it the way you read a room when you walk in and need to understand what kind of room it is. I found 2 rocks, one flat, one with a broken edge. I spent 11 minutes shaping the broken edge against the flat one with steady, even pressure. When I was done, I had something close to a blade. Not sharp enough to be aggressive, sharp enough to be useful. Outside the chamber, the observation deck had grown quiet. I learned this later, at the 1 hour mark when I was still active. The remaining student eliminations had brought the total down to 4 survivors, me, Edevel somewhere silent and invisible, and 2 others I did not know well. By the 90-minute mark, Edevel's tone sounded, then the 2 others 3 minutes apart. I was alone in the simulation. At the 2-hour mark, Velsarin sent a message through the simulation interface, not to me, a note in the observation log, which I would read. Afterward it said, "Flag for review. Participant OSA has not engaged with any predator encounter, reviewing behavioral log." What the behavioral log showed, as he would tell me later, was that I had not avoided the predators. I had moved in patterns that kept me consistently in their blind spots. I had used the bitter leaf smell on my hands, which had apparently masked my biological scent signature from the simulation. Olfactory modeling. I had used the water data to identify which areas of the environment were active zones for prey animals and had avoided those. I had not tried to win. I had tried to become part of the system, well enough that the system did not notice me. At 2 hours and 20 minutes something happened that had apparently never happened in the history of the simulation exercise. The predator AI stopped pursuing me. Not because I had defeated it, not because I had hidden successfully. The system log would show that the AI had flagged me 3 separate times, initiated approach sequences, and then canceled them. On the 3rd cancellation, the AI had reclassified me in its internal taxonomy. I was not in the prey category. I was not in the threat category either. The AI had created a new category in real time. It had no label for the category. It was simply a space in the system where I existed, separate from the logic that governed everything else. Velsarin ended the simulation at the 3-hour mark. The chamber door opened, the amber light dissolved, the trees went gray and folded away. I was standing on a flat gray floor in a room that smelled faintly of recycled air and metal. I walked out. Raquez was in the observation area, so were Edivore and Dune, and most of the cohort. They were all looking at me with the specific expression of people who have been watching something they do not have words for yet. I sat on the bench near the door, pulled off my right boot, checked the sole. There was a small crack in the outer edge, probably from the rock surface. Near the overhang, manageable. I put the boot back on, pulled off the left sole. Intact. I tied them both double knot. Loop tucked. I stood up. "Good sim," I said. Edivore spoke first. She had been standing very still near the observation window, and now she took one precise step forward. "The predator AI reclassified you," she said. "I saw the system log in real time. It created a new taxonomic category for your presence." "I know," I said. "What category?" I picked up my bag. "I do not know. The system did not label it." "It stopped hunting you," Raquez said. His voice was entirely without performance, just the words. "It stopped seeing me as something to hunt," I said. "That is a different thing." Dune's collar interface hummed low. His large eyes tracked me with the same expression as always. Equation unfinished. I did not explain further. There was nothing more to explain that the simulation log had not already shown. I had not done anything extraordinary by my own reckoning. I had done what the situation required. I had read the environment, worked with it rather than against it, and stayed patient long enough for patience to be its own kind of answer. Velsarin stood near the system terminal. He was looking at the log with his 4 respiratory sacs very still, which I had learned meant he was thinking carefully. He did not look at me, he looked at the screen, he looked at the entry where the AI had stopped hunting and created its unnamed category. He did not say anything that afternoon, but I saw him make a note. I did not know what the note said. I would find out much later. In the meantime, I shouldered my bag, nodded once to Edivor and walked toward the corridor. Behind me, I heard Rakas say something to the student beside him. I could not hear the words, but I noticed it was not the callous joke. I noticed it was not a joke at all. The common area on the station's fourth deck was called in the student directory the interspecies gathering space, which was the kind of name that people who have never actually gathered together come up with. Everyone else called it the floor, because that was what it was. A large floor with furniture arranged, clusters, lighting adjusted to multispecies tolerances, a food station along the far wall where students could bring items from home and share them. I arrived late. The gathering had been going for a while, and the floor already had the warm, slightly disorganized energy of a party where people are genuinely surprised to be enjoying themselves. Edivor was seated at a table near the far wall with a small device in front of her that I recognized as a chemical analysis tool. She was running every item on the food table through it before deciding whether to eat. This was, I had decided, the most Edivor behavior I had witnessed, which was saying something. I found it genuinely comforting. Some people love the world by measuring it. First, Dune had brought something to the food table in a dark container. He opened it. When I arrived, the smell was copper in deep ocean and something I had no word for. He looked at me and then at the container and then back at me in the Morkan way that substituted for an invitation. I took a small piece. It tasted like the smell, mineral and dense and not unpleasant, like eating something very old that had decided to become food. Thank you, I said. His collar interface produced a sound that the translator converted to a single word. Sustenance, he said, which could have meant you are welcome or simply been a description of what he had brought. With Dune, I had stopped trying to separate the two. Rakas arrived with 6 arms full of things. He had clearly overprepared, which was, I was learning, another way. His actual anxiety expressed itself under the performance. He arranged everything on the table with exaggerated care, named each item, and then stood back as if awaiting a grade. I picked up a warm glass of something that smelled faintly of citrus and minerals. I held it in both hands. The gathering moved through its natural rhythms, conversations about coursework and home planets and the difficulties of calibrating sleep cycles to station time. Rakas fell into a story about a misunderstanding he had had with the station's cleaning system that was genuinely funny, not the performed kind, the real kind where the humor comes from something embarrassing that has resolved safely and can now be laughed at. I stood near the edge of the group with my warm glass. I did not drink it. I was not sure why. It smelled fine. I just kept holding it. Rakas turned to me at some point in the middle of the gathering when the conversation had found a momentary lull. He had all 6 arms in the relaxed position. I now knew meant he was not performing, he was just talking. Can I ask you something? He said. About Earth? Yes. What does it feel like to be from there? I thought about this. It was not a question I had been asked before, not in that form. Most questions about Earth were about specific facts, the gravity, the oxygen levels, the wildlife. This one was asking something else. It feels ordinary, I said. While you are in it, you do not feel the gravity. Because you grew up in it, you do not notice the density of the biological activity because it is just what is. Outside the window, I turned the warm glass in my hands. You only understand it when you leave. Raquez was quiet for a moment, and now that you have left, now I understand it differently, I said, not better, just from the outside. He tilted his head in the way he did when he was genuinely processing something. I looked up your planet's classification before this gathering. He said, not the course registry, the original survey records from the first contact team. I waited. The species that named it a death world, he said. They went to study it. A full research team, 14 scientists. They landed, they sent one transmission. He paused. They did not send another. I did not say anything. And you are here, he said, from that place. You are at a party. His expression was not mocking. It was something closer to genuine bewilderment. How do you do that? I thought about how to answer that. Honestly, I do not know how not to, I said. Raquez processed this for a long time. Long enough that the conversation around us had shifted twice and come back again. Before he spoke, on my world, he said, fear is a signal to leave. I know that is the standard model, I said. It makes sense. Fear identifies danger. The rational response to danger is distance. What is the irrational response? I looked at the warm glass in my hands, deciding that the thing on the other side of the fear matters more than the fear itself. Raquez considered this with all 6 arms still and both sets of eyes directly on me. That is not irrational, he said. No, I said, but it is not safe either. Is there a difference between irrational and unsafe on Earth? Yes, I said, we know the difference. We just do not always let it stop us. He was quiet again. I let him be quiet. I had learned that Raquez's silences were working silences. Something was happening in them even when nothing was visible. Later, when the gathering had thinned and the food table had been reduced to the things nobody had wanted to try, first Dune appeared beside me at the window. The station's 4th deck had a narrow strip of exterior view along the north wall, and I had drifted to it sometime in the last hour without consciously deciding to. Old habit. I always find the windows in unfamiliar rooms. He stood beside me for a while without speaking. The silence with Dune was different from the silence with Roca's. Not full of working, just present, like standing beside a large quiet body of water. Then he spoke. My people have a word, he said. His collar interface gave the translation time to settle before continuing. Verath Khan, he said the original word with his actual voice first. The vibration of it went through the floor and up through my boots. It describes a thing that survives by becoming part of what kills others, a parasite in some uses, in the older use, a survivor. I looked at the stars outside the window. We do not have a word, Dune said, for a thing that chooses to do it. He turned. He walked back toward the center of the room. He did not look back. I stood at the window. The warm glass was still in my hand. I still had not drunk it. Outside, the stars were the same stars I had looked at from the window on that first day. From the corridor outside xenobiology, when Rokas had been telling the callous joke and I had been holding the smile my mother taught me and trying to figure out what kind of semester this was going to be. It was going to be this kind of semester, the kind where you stand at a window, holding a warm glass and somebody says something to you in a language you did not know existed, and the translation lands in the center of your chest and stays there. I did not explain how it landed. I finished my gathering. I said good night to Edival, who was still analyzing the chemical composition of a food item she had not yet decided about. I nodded to Rokas, who nodded back with genuine warmth and no performance at all. I left the warm glass on the table near the window, still full. In the corridor, I tied my boots. Then I walked back to my room and sat for a long time thinking about the word. That meant the thing that chooses. The final presentations were held in the main lecture hall, same room as the first day, same curved rows, same hollow display, same 40 seats but 40 days of shared lab work and one simulation that had changed something in the air between us, had made the room feel different, not smaller, more specific, more like a room where actual people sat rather than a room where strangers performed the role of students. Velsorin stood at the front. He had the same stillness he always had, the four respiratory sacs quiet, the violet skin unhurried, but he was watching the room differently today, not managing it, witnessing it. The assignment had been given 4 weeks earlier, a case study. Each student would present the single most significant biological contribution their home planet had made to the field of interstellar knowledge, not the largest, not the most dangerous, the most significant. The distinction mattered, Velsorin had said, and we should think carefully about why. I was scheduled last. Rokas went early. He stood at the front of the room with his 6 arms arranged in an unusual way, forward and open, rather than gestural and ready, and he presented the fungal network of his home world without a single joke. Not because he had suppressed them, because what he was saying did not need them. He talked about the network's communication patterns, the way it responded to injury across hundreds of kilometers, the way it stored something that functioned like memory in its oldest growth sections. He talked about it with the clear, focused energy of someone who loves what they are studying without needing others to confirm that the love is justified. When he sat down, I said quietly, "That was very good." He said, "I know," but he said it softly, not performance, just honesty. Edival's presentation ran 14 minutes over the allotted time. She did not notice. She was deep in the crystalline, bacterial lattice formations of her home world's deep shelf, and she had brought 3-dimensional models that she rotated and reoriented throughout her presentation to show how the structures functioned under different pressure conditions. Velsorin did not stop her. Nobody stopped her. The room was watching the crystal rotate, and the silence was the kind that happens when a room full of people all realize at the same moment that they are learning something they did not know they needed to know. She sat down when she was finished and immediately pulled out her analysis tool to check the chemical composition of the water glass on the desk. Some constants are stabilizing. Dune presented last among the others. He stood at the front of the room, and his collar interface translated as he spoke. He presented the deep ocean pressure ecosystem of Morval, where organisms had adapted to live at pressures that would collapse most known biological structures. He showed data on the molecular architecture that allowed Morval deep water life to exist under conditions that exceeded the structural limits of every other known carbon-based biology. He presented this without drama, just the numbers, the structures, the elegant solutions that pressure had demanded and life had found. Then he looked at me. Not for long, just a moment, the equation still working. He sat down, and then it was my turn. I walked to the front of the room with my bag and my stylus and no notes, because what I was going to say did not require notes. I had known what I was going to present since the second week of the semester, when I had read my own student file and seen the words mechanism unknown and felt something click into place in the way that things click into place when you stop arguing with a truth and just let it sit. I turned to face the room. 40 students, 40 worlds, more or less 40 biology sitting in chairs that had been designed on the whole without me in mind. I pulled up the hollow display. What appeared was not an animal, not a plant, not a fungal network or a crystalline bacterial formation or a pressure-adapted deep ocean organism. It was a building. Specifically, it was a hospital, a large one, an exterior shot taken from above, from a research satellite image showing the rooftop with its ventilation systems and its emergency landing pad and its solar array, and beyond it the city, around it which was just a city gray and wide and ordinary, the kind of city that exists because enough people decided to stay in one place long enough to need one. The room was quiet. Earth's most significant biological contribution, I said, is not an organism, it is a behavior, and the behavior is this. I clicked to the next image, an operating room, surgeons in masks and gloves, instruments in hand, lights overhead, a patient on the table who was alive because that room existed and those people had trained for years to be in it. Earth's dominant species took its own body apart to understand it, I said. Not metaphorically, literally. We dissected ourselves, studied our own mechanisms, mapped the interior of our own cells, isolated the specific proteins that caused disease, and then designed molecules to interfere with those proteins. I clicked again, a laboratory. Microscopes, centrifuges, walls lined with the controlled chaos of active research. We pulled dying hearts out of chests, I said, and replaced them with machines that do what hearts do. We rebuilt bones with materials we invented. We trained the body's own defense systems to recognize threats they had never encountered before and destroy them before they could take hold. I paused. We did all of this on a planet where a microscopic parasitic mite can collapse, a bee colony where a fungus can redirect an insect's behavior to serve its own reproduction, where a single infectious organism can sweep through a population and reshape history. We did it surrounded by all of that, in the middle of all of that, without ever fully controlling any of it. Another click, a map, Earth's surface, with small markers at various points. Research stations, hospitals, medical centers, field clinics in remote locations. The map was dense. The Markers were everywhere. And then, I said, we started doing it. For other species. The room was very still. We did not wait to be asked. We did not wait until it was economically advantageous or politically useful. We found organisms we had never encountered before, organisms that could not communicate with us in any recognizable way, and we tried to understand what was wrong with them and fix it. We built entire fields of study around the question of how to help things that were not us. I looked out at the room. Roka's had all 6 arms completely still. Analysis tool was on the desk in front of her, unused. Dune had not looked away from me since I started speaking. The equation was still running. Earth's Deathworld status, I said, is accurate. The data supports it. Biosphere is dense, aggressive, complex, to a degree that has been classified as non-standard by every survey team that has attempted to categorize it. Some of those teams did not return. I let that sit for a moment. The thing the classification misses is that the species that evolved inside that biosphere did not survive it by becoming tougher or faster or more dangerous than everything else. They survived it by developing the capacity to understand it, and once you develop the capacity to understand a system, you develop the capacity to understand other systems, and once you can do that, you cannot help wondering about the ones you have not reached yet. I looked at the map again, the dense scatter of markers, the planet-wide network of people trying to help things that were not them. Earth's greatest biological achievement is not survival, I said, it is that the death world made us want to help. Yours survived too. I set my stylus on the desk. I picked up my bag. I sat down. The room held the kind of silence that is not empty, the kind where something has gone into the air and is still settling. Vel's Aaron stood at the front for a long moment without speaking. His respiratory sacs moved through one full cycle, then another. He turned to the system terminal. He opened the course registry. He found Earth's entry. He looked at it. Non-standard, anomalous, the classification that had been there since the first survey teams had tried to make sense of a planet that did not behave. He typed. He did not announce what he was typing. He did not read it aloud. He simply changed the entry and then stepped away from the terminal and closed the lecture. I found out what it said when the updated registry arrived in my student account that evening. Anomalous biosphere, non-standard, had been removed. In its place, origin point, category, apex generalist, cross-reference all units. I read it twice. Then I put my tablet down and looked at the ceiling of my small room on the 3rd residential deck and thought about my grandmother pulling dandelions from the yard in a crawl, calling them weeds, being right and being also in a way she never would have described it. One of the most persistent things on a planet full of persistent things. After class, in the corridor outside the lecture hall, Rokas fell into step beside me. He was quiet for half the corridor's length. This was by now a recognizable sign. I looked up the old survey records. Again, he said, the original death world designation. It was filed by a team from Velhari Prime, 14 scientists. First contact survey 80 years ago by your calendar. I looked straight ahead. They landed in a forested region, he said. They sent one transmission back to the survey ship. The transmission said the environment was more complex than initial orbital readings had suggested, and that they were establishing a base camp to begin systematic study. He paused. There was no second transmission. We walked. They were very good scientists, he said. 3 of them had previous death world surveys on their records. They went to study Earth because they wanted to understand it. I know, I said. And you came here, he said, not an accusation, not wonder exactly. Something between them. From the planet that did not let them leave. You came here on a transport ship. And you sat in row 4 of the lecture hall and you listened to my jokes, and you went into the simulation, and you brought honey to the lab, and you just kept going. I looked at him. He had all 6 arms in the forward open position, real attention, no performance. How do you not think about it? He said. The planet what it is. I do think about it, I said. And I thought about my boots on the floor of the simulation chamber, the crack in the right sole that I had assessed and judged manageable, the water I had tested on my wrist before deciding anything, the rocks, the blade, the patient, unspectacular work of reading system until the system stopped seeing me as something to eliminate. It made me who I am, I said, so I cannot be sorry about it. Rokas stopped walking. I went 2 steps past him before I stopped and turned back. He was standing in the middle of the corridor with all 6 arms still, both sets of eyes on me, something in his expression that I did not have a word for in any language I spoke. The team that did not come back, he said, they went because they wanted to understand. Yes. And understanding was not enough. No, I said, not for them. He looked at me for a long moment. What was different, he said, for you? I thought about it honestly, not the diplomatic answer, not the modest one. The actual one. They went to study the planet, I said. I grew up on it. I picked up my bag on my shoulder. There is a difference between understanding something from the outside and being built by it from the inside. Rokas was quiet, working. I turned to go. Dara, he said. I looked back. He had dropped all 6 arms to his sides, every limb relaxed, the most unguarded I had ever seen him. I am glad, he said, that you came here. I nodded once. Yeah, I said, me too. I turned and walked toward the residential corridor. Behind me the corridor was quiet. No joke, no performance, just the sound of a student from a world I still could not pronounce correctly, standing in a hallway and thinking about things that had no easy category. Somewhere in the course registry, the entry had changed. Somewhere on Earth, a bee was flying between 2 flowers, doing what bees do, keeping the chain intact. Not because it understood the chain, because it was built for this, shaped for it, called toward it by something older and quieter than understanding. I tied my boots at the end of the corridor, double knot, loop tucked. Then I walked toward what came next.